The other 3.5 million, they'll start very, very soon to develop a road that will go in. It's called the Mill Creek Parkway, which is about 2,000 feet long. We'll go in between Almsville Highway and Turner Road. About halfway, that road will punch in and go directly into the property. It'll be a 4-lane road. It's going to be in place. Water, sewer, gas, electric, everything's going to be there. That's what we mean when we tell people that a piece of property is shovel ready. It's ready to go and they can get in there and get to work right away. I just have to say in closing how much I again appreciate this Chamber of Commerce. SEDCOR has been a member now, I believe, for 26 years. We strongly believe that it's the best chamber that I've ever seen. I strongly believe that. And I've seen a lot of chambers of commerce around the country, but I've never seen one operate quite the way this one does. You should be proud of it. You should be proud of all your past presidents and your folks that work at your chamber. They're working hard on your behalf. So I think with these strong partners and the strong partners that we have in all of our resource areas around the country, I think that 2010 is going to be a brighter year than you might think it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Tim. We do have a few minutes for questions. I think I saw either Jason or Kyle with a cordless microphone. Could I see a hand if anyone has a question for either of these gentlemen? Don't be shy. There we go.
This question is for Tim. The portion of the Boise building that has not been torn down, and the southern portion of that, is that going to be a parking garage?
Among other things. Good question. It was originally a warehouse for large paper rolls when Boise Corporation was operating there. So it's a very high ceiling, very stoutly built building. In fact, our structural engineer tells us we could actually put 3 or 4 more floors above if we wanted to. It's too good of a shell to give up. It's not real attractive at the moment because you got blank concrete walls, but the plan is to go in along the commercial street frontage in particular and cut large openings in that area that faces Commercial Street and turn that into office lease space so that we can get some glass curtain walls in there and it looks like a building and not a warehouse. We'll probably surround that building. We'll sort of do an L shape down Commercial Street and across the creek frontage with space that's occupied, and then the interior will be parking. The south end of the building, we're going to put exterior ramps on it so that you can get to the different levels without having to lose space inside the building. But we've current count is somewhere close to 470 to 480 parking spaces possible on 3 levels. So that should help with the parking shortage in that end of town.
This question's for Ray. Not really a question, just ask you to address something. I had a short conversation with the CEO of Solar World in Hillsboro and some discussion about potentially bringing some of their vendors that Sanyo would also use. Can you just kind of tell us a little bit how that process is going?
Sure. We have already cited one of their major vendors. Unfortunately, we didn't have the building that they needed, and they ended up going to, I believe, to Gresham. But that's one thing that we are doing now. We're not concentrating on, quote unquote, the big dogs. We're concentrating on what we call the supply chain. The companies that supply Sanyo's, supply Solar World. Solar World, by the way, is the largest manufacturer of solar cells in the world, and they're up in Hillsboro right now. So, and they're expanding. They're adding on 400,000 square feet, and I don't know how many new employees to meet the new markets for that industry. That is exactly where we want to be, and that's who we're pursuing when we go on these trips. The photovoltaic shows are pretty much international. So last year we were in Germany. We're in Tokyo this spring, and then we'll be back in Spain next fall. Oregon has a very strong presence at these shows, and For years, we were the only state that was there. Now we've got competition because the industry is growing so much. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, this is a little-known fact, and this guy ought to be shot for flying under the radar, but you all know Nate Levin. He just rehabbed a building over on Madison Street. This is a 50,000 square foot building. It's at 1337 Madison Northeast. It has the largest solar array in Salem on top of it. 40,000 square feet of solar panels on top of that building. Plus they redid the whole building, the interior and the exterior. He's got renters in there already. About 60% of it's leased up already. But here's a guy that took all the old timbers out of the old building, did just what Tim and his group did with the old timbers out of the Boise Cascade property. A company over in McMinnville bought them. They're rehabbing those timbers. They sold anything else off they could that had any value, and then they pulled a whole new infrastructure into that building and put solar panels on top. He gets the Good Guy Award in my book. So, unfortunately, they were Solar World panels, not Sanyo. So, but we'll argue with him about that later.
Any other questions over here? Oh, sorry, one over here.
This is for Tim. Tim, does the development plan for Boise Cascade include opportunities for affordable housing?
We're trying to put something together on there. We've got an opportunity to put housing on the roof of that south warehouse. The consideration, of course, is always the economics of it. What's it cost you to deliver housing? Can you hit those affordable benchmarks? But I know there's been several conversations with different groups on, is there a way to put something together that makes sense there? I mean, housing of some sort is certainly going to be a major component, and if you've looked around at the local condo market, we're probably not going to be in a big hurry to build fancy condos there.
I'm Pam Voracek with A.C. Gilbert's Discovery Village. Over the years, I've heard lots of rumors as to what's happening north of the Union Street Railroad Bridge. Right now, I realize the concentration is on the south end of Riverfront Park. Are there future developments going to the north end of Riverfront Park?
That might be a more appropriate question for the mayor, but from my information is now about 2 years old, but when I was working for the city as Public Works Director, one of the things that we were working with the Community Development Department on is how is that area going to redevelop north of the railroad bridge? Because it's certainly ripe for redevelopment, and there's some wonderful views and some great opportunities there. Some challenges with moving old industrial, moving current industrial potentially, and then access. If you're familiar with that area, the railroad, same railroad that I was speaking of on getting the crossing permits for Boise, actually runs right down the middle of the street for about a 7 to 10 block length. That's got to be dealt with somehow, but certainly they're not asleep at the switch. The city's been paying attention to that and looking towards the future on, okay, how would that redevelop when the opportunity comes up?
Want me to answer it?
Let me introduce Janet.
Well, the property has a mixed-use overlay on it, all of that riverfront, because certainly in the future. But our number one concern is that we don't force anything that creates job losses. There's still a lot of industry along that area, so we want to be there to encourage it if that's what the property owner wants to do, not force it on people. The railroad tracks are an issue. I don't know if you've ever driven down Front Street and looked in your rearview mirror and there's a train right behind you. And there have been some accidents that occurred. The head of the railroad, Genesee Railroad Company out of the East Coast, came to visit with me a year and a half ago, and he said, well, I'm here to let you know we're going to move the railroad tracks on Front Street. And I went, yes. He said, and we're just going to move them west a few feet. And I looked at him and said, no, you're not. And he didn't understand why, so I explained to him this is valuable redevelopment property, that we'll certainly work with them to relocate it where it does serve their customers, but not to the west. So I think we've got that sort of in the process that will be better. It is prime property. It will probably take 10, 15 years, depending on what the economy does. And we want to work with the property owners, not force anything on them.
All right, thank you, and let's give a big round of applause for Tim and Ray.